Most historians believe in the existence of Q, right? Bart Ehrman certainly does. Q, also known as the Sayings Gospel, was a written source of Jesus' sayings that Matthew and Luke used when writing their Gospels. I've spoken of Q in the past, so I'll keep it brief. In addition to the subtext of Paul's letters, Q is absolutely key for understanding what non-Pauline Christians believed about Jesus. How? Well, Q was most likely written in the 50s, independent of Paul. Now, Q probably had different strata of authorship over several years. But even despite this, let me quote what John Dominic Crossan said about Q. This is a direct quote from J.D. Crossan. There is nothing in the gospel according to Q about the crucifixion of Jesus or the resurrection of Jesus.
Wow.
There is nothing in the gospel according to Q about the crucifixion of Jesus or the resurrection of Jesus. J.D. Crossan. In other words, the passion narratives of Matthew and Luke, right, either come from Mark, really a redaction of Mark, or they are unique to their own gospel accounts, what textual critics call special M and L material, special Matthean and Lucan material. And of course,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but do you happen to know the source of John Dominic Crossan? Which book he said that in? Nothing.
This was in a podcast, and I can I'll send it to you, inshallah.
All right, I didn't realize. Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Just in a recent podcast.
Oh, really? Gosh.
Oh yeah. I'll send that to you, inshallah. So let me say that again. According to historians, the earliest known source of the Gospels said nothing about the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. In addition to this, the traditions found in Q are plausibly representative of Jamesonian Christianity, pre-Pauline Nazarene Christianity, Jewish Christianity. Is it plausible that the community that authored Q did not believe in the crucifixion of Jesus? Yes, it is plausible. Dr. Dennis MacDonald reconstructed the contents of Q, which he calls the first gospel. First gospel compared to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Q is the first gospel. He says that Q was not written by a Christian, but by a Jew. He means a messianic Jew, a Jew who believes in Jesus, but not in the Pauline sense. He says in Q, there is no salvation by Jesus because of his crucifixion, end quote. And in fact, there is no crucifixion. According to MacDonald, Jesus is making the Jewish law more compatible and more compassionate for people who are sort of on the margins of society. And this is why Jesus has these arguments with the Pharisees. He says that when you demythologize Jesus, you get a Jewish reformer, you get a prophet and teacher of a more relaxed form of the law of Moses. This is very close to what the Quran says. Jesus is quoted in the Quran, I have come to confirm the Torah before me and to make lawful for you some of what was unlawful. So fear God and obey me. God is my Lord and your Lord. Worship him. This is the straight path. Now, as I said earlier, the four Gospels are the main, quote, historical sources of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. And here's something else about the Gospels. Just as the divine status of Jesus increases as we move chronologically through the Gospels, this evolution of Christology from Mark to John that James Dunn and Bart Ehrman talk about. Likewise, the evangelists want to increasingly convince their readers that Jesus was crucified. And one way in which they do this is by exaggerating the events surrounding the crucifixion. So in Mark, darkness came over the whole land, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, okay? In Matthew, there's darkness, the curtain tears, but there's also an earthquake and a zombie apocalypse. Many Jewish saints were resurrected, and they walked around Jerusalem, appearing to many, according to Matthew. Some contemporary evangelical scholars have admitted that this is most likely a legend. And these include Dr. Mike Licona, who debated me several years ago, and back then defended the absolute historicity of the crucifixion and resurrection accounts in the New Testament. It seems maybe he's changed some of his views in more recent years. In his book, he referred to the resurrection of the saints as poetical and an embellishment and special effects, right? So Licona's new position has invited upon himself the wrath of many Christian apologists, including the notorious Norman Geisler of Answering Islam fame. Let me quote you Norman Geisler. He said he, meaning Licona, claims that Matthew is using a Greco-Roman literary genre, which is a flexible genre in which, and now he's quoting from Lacona, from his book, The Resurrection of Jesus, page 34, in which it is often difficult to determine where history ends and legend begins.
Wow.
Lacona also, this is now Giesler again, Lacona also believes that that other New Testament texts may be legends, such as the mob falling backward at Jesus' claim, I am he, in John 18, and the presence of angels at the tomb recorded in all 4 Gospels. So this is very interesting. Lacona admits that this event in Matthew sounds a lot like Plutarch's death of Romulus. It's probably a legend. Now, Luke does not mention the rising of the saints from the dead. The author of John does something amazing. John, I'll just call him John for convenience. John has the advantage of hindsight. So in light of new developments among the Christian community, John can correct and revise elements in the synoptic passion narratives, right? John moves the day of the crucifixion up one day to the day of the Passover preparation when the lambs were being slaughtered. John is making a theological point here. Again, this is history made subordinate to theology. Either John is right or the synoptics are right, but both cannot be right. And Jesus was not crucified twice, but both can also be wrong. John eliminates Simon of Cyrene bearing Jesus' cross, saying that Jesus bore his own cross. John has Jesus impaled on the cross, and he has Jesus' body anointed before his burial, all contradicting the synoptics, and all made to demonstrate that Jesus was not substituted, he did not swoon, he was dead on the cross and buried in the tomb. Now, the so-called Gospel of Peter was written after John, and by the time we get to that gospel, the church fathers said, okay, enough is enough. In the Gospel of Peter, the cross comes out of the tomb and starts speaking to people. The early fathers said, we can deal with saints rising from the dead, but not with a talking cross. So we go from Mark, where Pilate marveled, is he dead already? And no one sees a resurrected Jesus, all the way to a talking cross in Peter, so-called Gospel of Peter. Matthew, Luke, John, and Peter increasingly trying to convince their readers that Jesus was crucified. Now, why was there an increased insistence upon the divinity of Jesus from Mark to John, according to historians? The answer is because the evangelists were responding to Christians who differed about the divinity of Jesus. I would argue that this is the same reason why we also see an increased insistence upon the crucifixion of Jesus. The evangelists were responding to Christians who differed about his crucifixion. This makes total sense.